This is the new era of regulation, and could probably be the most nerdy person in the room, so I'm so excited to be on the stage with you guys talking about regulation. So I do want to do a little bit more of an introduction. So right next to me, I have Katherine Dowling. She's a Harvard Law grad and a former federal prosecutor in the Economic Crimes Unit at the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Northern District of California, working alongside the SEC and the IRS on financial crimes. She spent 5 years as an executive on the executive management team and also served as general counsel and CCO at Bitwise, where she co-led the spot Bitcoin and Ethereum ETF approvals and served as the firm's primary point of contact for regulators. She is now president of Bitcoin Standard Treasury Company, so thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
And then I have Eleanor Terrett. It's probably no introduction needed here, but Eleanor is a former Fox Business journalist and who now co-hosts the Crypto in America podcast and has broken major crypto regulatory stories ahead of public announcements. One of the most closely watched reporters covering Washington's approach to digital assets. Welcome.
Thank you.
Yes, and Grant McCarty, co-founder and executive director of the Bitcoin Policy Institute, the leading Bitcoin-focused policy organization in Washington, directly engaged with the White House on Bitcoin policy, and one of the most active voices pushing for developer protections, tax reforms, and Bitcoin-specific legislation on Capitol Hill. Thank you for joining us.
Excited to dig into this.
Yes,
All right.
It's great. So thank you all again for joining us today. So I'm going to start. There's a lot going on. And there's news breaking today, even, right? So in the past 14 months, which I think we've all understood has really opened the door here for digital assets, we've seen the regulatory table completely reset, whether that's strategic Bitcoin reserves, the Genius Act, banks no longer needing advance permission to engage with crypto, and the DOJ disbanding its crypto enforcement team. And then we have Paul Atkins at the SEC, so it's super exciting. Is the durable policy architecture that's taking place today, is that long-term or is this a short-term change of tables?
Do you want me to hop in?
It's open.
It's definitely long-term. Legislation, of course, is the gold standard, and it's all three of us on this stage have spent many years working on that, and we'll continue to do so. And I'm an optimist. I think it's coming, despite the recent noise. We're down to the 5% of issues. But I say long-term. We do want to make it administration-proofed. But the SEC is doing a lot of stuff with rulemaking, putting out guidance, none of which was provided during the Gensler days. So the Atkinized SEC has been an active SEC, and we finally get the full weight of Commissioner Peirce, who has been an advocate in the space for many years in the dissent, and now she gets to be forward and shaping that policy. So all of that rulemaking has that's out there. So we at least have that, and to boot, we're we're in bipartisan land. People on both sides of the aisle want this legislation, all of which is very positive. Yes, there are hot button issues that break down along party lines. We'll probably talk a little bit about some of the conflict of interests and and the yield, but it doesn't always break down by party lines, and these have to be worked out. I'm, as I said, optimistic that they will be, but again, legislation gold standard, but a lot has been done to move the needle in the right way, and really kind of coat that runway with what was needed to get out of the enforcement era with opaque, no definitions, no guidelines, and into a new era of let's put the rules out there. Let's not pretend it's too hard. Let's actually roll up our sleeves, figure out what we need to, put some rules forward, and create some sandboxes as well. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And to Eleanor and Grant, I would be interested, it's all coming, right? And we'll see it approved hopefully this year. Is there enough runway before the next big election to make it actually codified, that this is actual things that we're going to see continue?
I mean, the clock is ticking for sure.
12 weeks.
Yeah. So I think that's the headline number, but I think when you factor in recesses, the Senate likes to take days off, especially when it comes to summer. We are looking at about 9 to 10 weeks actually to get the bill across the Senate floor, and then it has to go back down to the House, and then depending on how the House feels, whether they like what the Senate's done, because don't forget, the House actually passed clarity, as you guys know, last year, and it was their own separate version. The Senate's kind of come up with its own thing, and they're sending back pretty much a, I'd say, entirely new product. It's not entirely new, but it is different. And so we've got to figure out how the House feels about that, whether French Hill is going to be in a good enough mood after the debacle with the housing bill and the SAVE Act. Relations between the Senate and the House right now are not exactly friendly, I would say. Although French Hill did push back on that. He said, we're great working colleagues, but we'll have to see when that bill finally makes it out of the Senate, if it makes it out of the Senate, what those relations will be, that reconciliation period between the bills, putting them together. And then, that clock is really ticking down to the midterm elections. I think conventional wisdom now is that if it doesn't get done by August, then it's going to be pretty much dead in the water, I think. And I've actually heard people say to the contrary, right? And Summer Mersinger, who's the Blockchain Association CEO, she said, and this is stuck out in my mind, because she's not just anybody, right? She's someone who's been in government. She's been at CFTC. She used to lead the CFTC. She's used to work for John Thune. So she's actually seen, government in operation for many, many years. So she thinks that if the bill doesn't pass before August, that we'll actually still have a chance to get it done post-August. So, there's people that say nay, and there's people that say yay. But I think most people believe that if it's not done by August, it will be, a lost cause. But, we do have a couple more weeks, and it's looking like the news today. Senator Tom Tillis has sort of backed off of his determination to hear out all the banks, all the state-level banks who want to come in and have something to say about the stablecoin yield deal. And he did say, I'm going to encourage Chairman Scott to schedule a markup. And so we're probably looking at a markup in the Senate Banking Committee mid-May. Cynthia Lemus said mid-May today. So we have a bit of a timeline. But again, there's a lot of nuance, a lot of procedural steps that go into marking up a bill, marking up legislation. I find myself often on crypto Twitter trying to reiterate and sort of explain the procedural steps. And I have to teach myself. I kind of have to relearn and go through the process every time we go through this. We went through it with Genius. We're going through it again with Clarity. But there's some runway, but that runway is slowly shortening, I would say.
Wars come up and throw
and then there's all those
damper
other
on the
things.
procedure and
Right.
actually make it sidelined.
There's a Fed chair nominee that needs to get.
There's that.
Yeah.
Yes.
Small thing.
Just small issues. So it depends on who you ask is the long and the short of it.
Okay.
I'll just say politics is a lot about what have you done for me lately, and I will say that there's a lot of pressure and a fire that is being lit under people, because regardless of however many wins there have been over the last 18 months, there's a lot of money that is currently sitting on the sidelines from the broader crypto industry, and they're trying to figure out how do we deploy this in the midterms and trust that they're going to be either directly incentivized or disincentivized from supporting certain people depending on what happens over the next 4 to 12 weeks. So I think both parties are definitely thinking about that very deeply.
On the positive side, you're seeing the trade associations really pull their support base and get those letters out, show all the names on there, and as you indicated, what have you done for me lately? There's also dollar signs behind that in terms of interim elections coming up. Let's be real, it's politics.
Absolutely.
So they're gonna see that, and they've got to be thinking about making sure that they're supporting.
Great. All right. Well, thank you all for that and what we think is going to come. So let's talk about things that have happened and what you've participated in. So Katherine, you co-led the spot Bitcoin and Ethereum ETF launches for Bitwise and were the firm's primary point of contact with the regulators. What does that experience tell you about how durable the current SEC's posture actively is, and what happens if the political winds change?
Well, I still have a lot of PTSD, truth be told, about that experience. Worked very closely with Josh here on the front row from KPMG, good in the digital asset space. I think over that time, multi-year time period, we at Bitwise, my prior role at Bitwise, we produced about 500 pages of research, and the goalposts just kept getting moved. We didn't have the definitions. We were trying to push for that, and it was very frustrating. But we did get it out in the Gensler era. Of course, his hand was forced. I'm sure you guys know the background by the grayscale lawsuit, which helped back him into a corner. Because turns out Gensler is not a lawyer, by the way. I know everyone thinks he is, but he's not.
Goldman guy.
Yeah, Goldman guy. And having worked with the SEC, I still had a lot of friends at the SEC, and the morale there was, as you would expect, not great, right? So when we went into the SEC, and we would go in with a small group, I would go in with one of my colleagues, and we just took on the approach of like, we're gonna just teach and just answer the questions. And I always think a smaller group is better for that. I will admit, kind of laugh at some of the other groups that would come in with like 50 lawyers. And like the SEC is like, whoa, yeah. Like, we were drawing diagrams. And because I was in government before, I knew well enough to bring my own markers because they don't work in the government offices. So, and put them up on the whiteboards. And a little hack as well. If you're putting stuff up on the whiteboards, you then don't have to produce it in the public record. So that was good too. So we were able to answer the questions. So it was a really long process to say. But we got it out in Gensler, as I said, and it was a huge door opener. And now, Morgan Stanley has an ETF. I mean, we used to be on the phone with Morgan Stanley, and there's like one guy who was the Bitcoin guy, and they kept him around because he was super smart. But the rest of them were like, I don't know about this. And we would get on, and we would bring all of our executive team and talk to them and teach. And now they have an ETF. Like it's like the punctuated equilibrium. Remember from like 6th grade bio? It's like things are slow, and then things happen really quickly. And we are in that evolutionary stage. And even with the blips with clarity, et cetera, you really have to focus on the fact that despite the drawdown, we're still in the 60s, 70s, right? And we've seen liquidity survive that. We haven't had the headline banging issues with, FTX. Sorry to mention it, right? But we're in a more positive space. So I think it's also important, not to be Pollyanna about it, right? But to actually focus on some of those positives and academic proof points that are growing the space. And we're seeing so many businesses at BSTR. We're talking to so many young businesses that are back in the States and that are looking at ways to bridge the gap between TradFi and digital assets. And there's some unique and interesting business opportunities there. And we're in that kind of evolutionary vacuum where there's still a lot of money to be made by creating structured, risk-managed businesses that are approaching things in a different way than some of the businesses did previously, right? Like avoiding rehypothecation, making sure we have collateralization, making sure that creditworthiness is actually checked, right? And as the banks come in, and they're going to come in more and more, we're already seeing that, but as they come in and like actually get their rails ready, it's really going to be a leap forward. And that's where that kind of punctuated equilibrium is going to jump forward.
Yeah, absolutely. It legitimizes everything when the big banks come in. Yeah. Great. All right, Eleanor. You consistently break regulatory news before it becomes public. What's the story in Washington right now in the crypto industry that should be paying more attention to?
So beyond clarity, I think payment stable coins, skinny master accounts, say payment accounts, they're calling them at the Fed, I think is going to be definitely something to watch. Fed Governor Waller is big into this, and he's leading the charge over at the Fed right now. It's basically going to give fintech companies, crypto companies, access to the Fed's payment rails. It's going to be a little bit of a watered-down version of a full master account, so you don't get access to the lending window. There's a couple other things that you can't do the same as regular banks who access the Fed, but it's basically going to kind of get rid of some of those frictions that the companies kind of go through right now with partner banks, right? They can't access the Fed on their own. They have to partner with these banks. They're paying through the nose all these fees, and sometimes they're passing it on to some of their consumers as well. So it'll be good for crypto companies. It'll be good for consumers if the framework goes through. I believe Governor Waller is working on that right now. Some guidelines to come soon with public comment, so we should be seeing that soon. Crypto taxes as well. I know that's been a big one for you guys. I think just as mainstream adoption comes, right, that comes with, implementing and putting this new technology into everyday life, and everyday life is taxes. I'm friends with one of the tax, I guess she's Trish. I don't even know how to describe her. She's just like tax whiz, right? She's just wonderful. She's like one of the few people who really understands Bitcoin taxes, crypto taxes. She works for Crypto Tax Girl. And I've talked to her before, and she's just kind of, I I shudder to think. I just obviously tax season just went past, and I don't invest in crypto. That's kind of one of the things about me that a lot of people do know. I had a hard enough time with my regular taxes. Well, if you sure invest in crypto, and I think it must have been a very challenging thing to have your CPA do for you. And I just, I think people who are crypto CPAs are just probably very talented. And I think that's definitely going to be a space to watch, because we've got some policy coming down from some of the House members. There's some pushes in Congress to get that really addressed. So I think that will definitely be one to watch. Whether that happens this year or not, we'll have to see. Maybe Grant can give us some insights into that. And also bank capital standards as well, because right now there's restrictions on how much crypto exposure banks can have, I think. And once those walls come down, I think a little bit more, obviously adoption will break into the mainstream even more than it has now. So I say those three things: bank capital standards, taxes, and skinny master accounts. They're being talked about, just not on the same level as clarity. But I think hopefully if clarity passes, those will be sort of the three things to watch.
Interesting. Yeah, BitGo Bank and Trust is an OCC regulated bank, so the skinny master account is something we're very interested in and getting across the line. There's multiple companies out there now looking at the same thing. So do you have a crystal ball and a timeline that you think that's going to happen? Asking for a friend.
I think the guidelines should be coming out in the next couple of weeks to months. So the Fed will propose the guidelines, and then everybody will get a chance to kind of weigh in on public comment. I know Governor Waller said he wanted to have those finalized by the end of this year. Great. So we're already 6 months, almost 6 months in.
Absolutely.
So we'll see.
Fantastic. All right, Grant. This leads a little bit into this conversation. The Bitcoin Policy Institute made the Blockchain Regulatory Certainty Act a bipartisan bill that would explicitly protect software developers from being treated as money transmitter for just writing code, a non-negotiable red line for market structure legislation. The DOJ has said that writing code is not a crime, yet Roman Storm, the developer who built Tornado Cash, a privacy protocol he no longer controlled, was convicted and faces retrial in October. How does the industry make sure those developer protections actually land in the final bill before that trial starts?
So the BRCA, Blockchain Regulatory Certainty Act, this has been one of our big pushes for the last couple of years. People talk about a chilling effect, and one of the key things that we've seen in the United States is when people who are actually using Bitcoin, when people who are transacting with Bitcoin, when people who are building on Bitcoin, which is going to be one of the biggest catalysts for Bitcoin's $1.5 trillion market cap. What does the next 5x or 10x of Bitcoin look like? It requires people building tools so that people can use, custody, send, hold Bitcoin more easily, and do that in a way that they feel comfortable with. One of those keys is privacy. People talk about Bitcoin as freedom technology. If you want to be able to utilize your money the way that you think is best, or if you want to send money to people around the world, or whatever it might be, and the Human Rights Foundation does a lot of incredible work talking about how people use Bitcoin for all sorts of reasons outside of the United States, to fight for democracy, just to pay people. If you want to be able to do that, you need the tools to do that. And what we've seen is people in the United States have been prosecuted for building those tools, despite those tools not operating or functioning like traditional financial intermediaries, like a bank or a third-party custodian or qualified custodian. And so, long story short, we've pushed so hard for this because we think this is fundamental to what makes Bitcoin Bitcoin. If Bitcoin just becomes something that people can only hold on an exchange, or people can't transact with, privately or using self-custody or peer-to-peer, then it's no longer the same Bitcoin, right? It's a cool technology, but it's not, Bitcoin as it was originated. So we've pushed for this to be in clarity. We've already talked about clarity timelines. How will it affect existing cases? The reality is, you mentioned Tornado Cash, but Samurai Wallet founders are they're going to be in prison for years. So this is something that I'm not necessarily confident is going to retroactively, make everything better. I know a lot of people are working behind the scenes, hoping for a pardon with regard to those cases. But this is something that, fortunately or unfortunately, is going to protect the next generation of builders and all of the companies that have stopped operating in the U.S., like a bunch of wallet builders and Bitcoin mixers have left the U.S. and stopped operating here or stopped servicing here since these cases. So when people talk about the chilling effect, we saw this with the SEC in the last administration, but we're seeing it now with builders. And while I am, over the moon at the institutional adoption of Bitcoin, and this is like how Bitcoin goes mainstream, we also have to protect all elements of Bitcoin's fundamental and inherent properties.
Absolutely. And then to just double click on the tax thing. So Bitcoin miners are taxed at twice on the same BTC. Once when they mine it and against when they sell it. The de minimis exemption still hasn't passed. How close do you think we are to actually fixing this? And what happens to the infrastructure if it doesn't?
So there are, similar with Clarity, there are a few members in the House who frankly are just not sold on the value proposition of Bitcoin and broader crypto as being good for America. One of our key missions, value propositions at BPI is that we think Bitcoin is good for America. We think Bitcoin is good for the world. We think those missions and visions are aligned, and that what's good for Bitcoin is good for the country, and vice versa, if we're all doing our jobs right. There are people in the House who don't necessarily believe that. There are career officials, I think, who, even if maybe political representatives, congressional members believe that Bitcoin is good, some of the career officials in committees on taxation or Treasury, they're more skeptical. We met somebody recently who has been at one of these committees since before the internet was invented in the 1980s. And of course, this person doesn't understand Bitcoin or think that Bitcoin is good because they have been looking at tax law and commodities versus securities and all these things for longer, not just longer than Bitcoin's been around, but more than double Bitcoin's existence. So it's hard to get through some of these people. I think we've had trouble with, if you're familiar with congressional scoring, in order to get something passed in some of these bills, you basically want the scoring to net out even on a revenue basis. So if we want to reduce or create a de minimis tax exemption, you've got to be able to pay for that some way. And I think there's a bit of a misunderstanding of what the de minimis exemption would actually do with regard to revenue. The tax people are looking at this and going, we're going to lose billions in tax revenue if we allow people to spend Bitcoin without paying their capital gains up to $600 or $200. Our point is the status quo is one of two things. Either they're not using it at all, so you're not gaining any tax revenue, or they're using it and they're not reporting it, so you're not gaining any tax revenue. So there's this misnomer, right, that there's going to be a $10 billion tax hole. And our point is like, no, that hole doesn't exist. And so these are some of the frankly, like not that sexy policy fights that we have to face. With regard to the possibilities, though, we've actually seen a lot more interest recently from a lot more members on the tax front. I think the mining one is becoming more and more of like that makes no sense, like kind of common sense change. And there are actually some things that we can do on a non-legislative front there, which are very exciting, so stay tuned. And that's the final thing that I'll say is, Katherine, to your point, one of the things to watch out for over the next 2.5 years is, like, regardless of what happens legislatively, the rulemaking, again, not very sexy, is where a lot of the real big impact is going to be made. And these are the things that they will remain durable regardless of political or partisan wins, because if you change the rules and it goes well and you two do your jobs well and people are using Bitcoin safely and soundly and the price is going up and things are going well, they're not going to just change the rules back and tank American companies. If I'm being optimistic or not super cynical about the previous administration, they didn't want to legitimize an industry that they were concerned about and be responsible for a bunch of scams and stocks tanking. But if these rules result in a lot of growth, then I think they can last regardless of what happens either in these midterms or 2028.
Absolutely agree. Yeah, and if some of those rulemaking had been in place in the past, we wouldn't have had some of those items that happened.
Situations?
Yes, exactly. Thank you. That's the word I was looking for, situations. All right, I'm going to shift topics a little bit here, just so we can get your perspective. It's open to the group, but maybe Katherine, if you'd like to start. DeFi just had its worst month in exploits since the Bybit breach. Over $600 million was stolen in April alone. Do you think the industry is better off getting ahead of the DeFi framework on its own terms, or does it wait until a big hack forces regulation?
Well, You got to separate out the hacks and the regulation, because the hacks, two words, North Korea, right? Like, let's be honest. If you know about the drift, this was a 6-month in-person meetings. This was personal relationships. Like, it's scary. Like, this is like, there's not like, I hope I'm not offending anyone in the room, but there's not a whole lot to do in North Korea. So, like, they've got a lot of spare time. They're like my teenage son. They can sit there and try to hack people. He doesn't do that, actually. I'm on record. But in reality, that's what they do. So, outside of regulation, take crypto out of it. Like, they're trying to do this on a number of fronts. It doesn't have to just be crypto. There's cash. There's lots of other ways. I mean, I know folks who are in Singapore running businesses, and they've been scammed because they come to the industry meetings there and they collect the personal information. So some of that is just training. You know, just really having every guard up to prevent the phishing possibilities, right? And just being aware that you've got to check the bona fides. You have to diligence everyone you're partnering with. And I know, like, with Drift, it was like, okay, great, you know, we've got this lead with this potential business opportunity, but you have to be diligent on checking and making sure that it's real, that it's a real business, and, you know, do all you need to do as a business to do that. And I think that's something that's from BSTR is very important to us to go through that process. So separate and apart from regulation, I think the regulation, I think where that can help for the DeFi space is just to kind of set some of those rules, create some standards. You know, with just like in, you know, your TradFi corollary, there's some requirements overlaid on RIAs to do some of that training to make sure that you have plans in place so that really the ultimate shareholders in those situations are protected, right? So some of those standards-driven modalities that could be placed upon those businesses to help avoid situations like that. Because the more we have hacks, the more, I mean, we're in Bitcoin, we're not in DeFi, but it kind of poisons the whole industry. And that's what it keeps people on the sidelines, because they're afraid of that. You know, I don't know how to code, like, I don't want my money stolen, and I understand that. So it's incumbent upon all of us, whether we're in DeFi or, you know, or Bitcoin or wherever we are in the space, to try to shore that up any which way we can.
Absolutely.
I think that hacks have driven a conversation, especially on crypto Twitter, about like what is DeFi, right? Especially after the Drift hack. And I think part of the Clarity Act has sections in there that do deal with things like this. So there was a section, I believe it's called the Dino section, decentralized in name only, which means that platforms who are decentralized in name only, right, who may not actually have, you know, the decentralization that they claim to have, will actually have to register with the SEC in some kind of capacity. I'm not entirely sure what all the ins and outs of it are, but there's protections against that. Like Katherine said, like there's standards, there's protections. So I feel like this was already kind of brewing beneath the surface, and there's been enough hacks, there's been enough scams in this space now to kind of have this regulatory guardrail be put in place, and we're going to see it no matter what. But again, it's DeFi, and it's really, obviously, really hard to regulate. I think this space, it's not, like you said, it's not, doesn't fit neatly into existing law, existing securities law. It's been sort of the age-old problem, right? But you also don't want to overregulate it and kind of stifle the technology or software developers.
This is the just the Bitcoiner in me. I think a lot of DeFi has just been the greatest marketing for Bitcoin, because time and time again, the things that are happening in DeFi are just so utterly ridiculous. Like rehypothecated coin, derivative of that rehypothecated coin, and then a derivative of that is used as collateral by a party who stole those derivative coins. And then by the time we find out that they were stolen, sorry, you're 3 layers deep, and now it becomes this cascade ripple effect that threatens to like destroy all of DeFi. That is like ridiculous, right? There's a reason why people kind of flock to Bitcoin, and it's because of, you know, there's simplicity, right? There are 21 million Bitcoin. Ideally, we're not dealing with a bunch of paper Bitcoin, but ultimately, like, yeah, DeFi is again, the maybe naive, but like glass half full, good faith interpretation of what we've seen in the past is like not wanting to enable that type of behavior. So I don't think it does maybe the broader crypto industry any favors, but I will say I think overall it's actually like pretty good marketing for Bitcoin, because despite all of this, Bitcoin every 10 minutes, TikTok next block, and we get to beat the same drum every day, year in and year out. And this is one of the reasons Bitcoin has had so much success on a regulatory and legislative front, because we've been saying the same things about Bitcoin since 2021 and 2023 and 2025 and now. And despite FTX, despite Aave ridiculousness, despite everything that happens in DeFi, every month, Bitcoin remains resilient and ultimately secure. And I think that allows a lot of people to feel comfortable creating rules, creating regulations. There's a reason why it was the first ETF that was able to be approved, right? This thing is a commodity, and everything else is a little terrifying if you're a lawmaker to deal with. But again, this is like the Bitcoiner in me.
Yeah.
I don't think everything else is bad. I understand if you're a lawmaker, you're like, I'm gonna not touch that with a 10-foot pole,
Well, we are up at time, but I'm going to hold you guys here for just a little bit longer because I didn't get through 20 of my questions I would have loved to ask you. So we've kind of bounced around here. So first, I would just like to ask all of you to come join us next year again, because we can continue this conversation. And can you imagine what it's going to be like in a year from now? Hopefully, fingers crossed. So I'm just going to ask a quick question for the last closing question. We've talked a lot about the policy environment and as favorable it is right now. What can still go wrong? And what does the industry need to do to make sure it doesn't go wrong?
Well, we don't like the headline items, right? And we just talked about some of the hacks, and even though we're in Bitcoin on at least the bookends, we'll get you there eventually. That does it puts a mark on the whole system, unfortunately. So we want to avoid that headline risk, and but you don't know what you don't know, right? So we hope to continue to march forward, get clarity going, et cetera. But you do worry about is there going to be another thing that we have to contend with? But I do like, as I said earlier, just we've seen price pressure on Bitcoin, yet we've seen that the foundations are there, and even though the prices come down quite a bit, and it's off its frothy top from the fall, and it's still doing fine, right? We're not having liquidity issues. We're not having market disruptions, et cetera. So I think that's good, but I always worry about the headline.
It's almost like it's trending against world news versus industry news right now.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm going to bring it full circle and go back to your original question of, is this durable? And I think in a sense, yes, it is. I think it's durable for a finite amount of time. I think for this administration, and it's becoming increasingly unclear about what's going to happen in the midterms, whether the House turns blue and what that means for clarity if it doesn't pass this year. I think passing that bill will be, crucial for keeping a lot of the industry here in the United States and not pushing it offshore again. I have the Crypto in America podcast, so we interview a lot of founders who have been happy to come back onshore and felt like they had to leave under the prior administration. And I know a lot of people are hoping and waiting on clarity for that to pass in order for that not to happen again. So I think, yes, that's what I'm going to wrap with.
All right. Thank you. Grant?
I think, again, I think Bitcoin's going to be just fine. What I'm concerned about is whether people in the United States can own, use, operate Bitcoin privately, whether they can mine Bitcoin. I'm concerned about the United States losing the AI and energy generation data center race. I think Bitcoin mining really set the precursor for the AI data center conversation. But I think there's kind of a broader geostrategic competition conversation that we talk about with regard to Bitcoin. China thrives off of digital authoritarianism. They thrive off of closed systems. Their digital yuan is meant to control, their populations and control ultimately the financial rails of companies that they trap in basically perma or perpetual debt. Bitcoin is this tool that the United States can use. We have the most Bitcoin of any country, at least reportedly. We have most of plurality of Bitcoin mining happening here. We have the most Bitcoin companies here. Like, this is our superpower and our way to maintain U.S. global dominance in the 21st century, despite what a lot of people are calling, like, they're calling it the Chinese century. And so what is like the real risk? The real risk to me is like Bitcoin continues to be fine to be a multi-trillion-dollar asset, but like we kind of lose out on this race, and China weaponizes, again, digital authoritarian systems, central bank digital currencies, and broader cryptocurrency ecosystems to beat the United States in like the digital age of the 21st century. So it's maybe less about like near-term regulation and more about long-term U.S. grand strategy. And I think more and more people in the intelligence community, Department of no longer Defense, Department of War, and the White House are really waking up to this. And I think this is where we're going to see, again, what does the next 5, 10, 20, 50x of Bitcoin look like? We're going to continue to see nation-state adoption. It's very exciting if we get that right.
Absolutely.
It's all
Should I be that girl should I be that person that says quantum?
Oh, yes. That as well. We'll have to save that for our next one because I think that's
A whole another panel.
Yes, absolutely. Well, thank you all for joining. This has been fascinating. I hope you will join us again next year because I think it'll be an even more fascinating conversation next year.
Thank you.
Yes,
Thank you for having us.
This is awesome. Thank you.